Hi folks, welcome to the 24 Hours of PaaS Summit Preview 2016. My name is Paresh Motiwala and I'm from Boston, and we are excited to have you guys join us today for Jen, Kevin, and Reza's session on enabling real-time analytics with CDC and data warehouse automation. The 24 Hours of PaaS event consists of approximately 24 sessions back to back. Each of these sessions are recorded and posted online after the event. I have some slides to go through, and then I will hand it over to Jen. Okay, so just a quick technical roundup on this. Oops, this went one too far. So if you have any questions, type it in the question box, as you can see towards the right hand side of your screen. You would get the best value for this if you maximize the screen as well. And at the end of it, you'll get a request for a survey for the session, and please do fill it up. It helps us improve all the time. So thank you to our sponsors, Microsoft, Idera, and Attunity. And I think the three speakers, all of them are from Attunity, and they are a leader in data integration and management software. They help move, transform, and analyze data efficiently in SQL and Azure environments. Okay, one sec. So please join PaaS if you have not already done so. It's free, and you can avail a lot of training opportunities for yourself, and they are all free for you too. And if you register today using this code 24HOP200, then you can still get $200 off in your PaaS 2016 Summit registration. And for those who have not been there, it could be a career-changing move. Please go. It's a lot of fun, a lot of networking, and a lot of learning. So the three speakers, it's a great pleasure to introduce them. So Jen Underwood is the founder of Impact Analytics, and she's got 20 years of hands-on data warehousing and reporting and predictive analytics experience, and she's a former Microsoft Principal Program Manager and a SQL Server BI. Kevin Petrie is a Senior Director at Attunity, 20 years of experience in tech, including marketing, big data services, strategy, and journalism. Frequent speaker and a blogger, and writes for various technology publications. He's a bookworm, outdoor fitness nut, husband, and a father of 3 boys. Kevin, I did not know about the bookworm part. And Reza Khan is the Director of Product Management at Attunity. He's had 20 years of experience in technology and technical support, extensive expertise in cloud and hybrid solutions, and he is also a frequent speaker, just like I am. So without much ado, I would really like to hand this over to Jen. And Jen, you can take it away from here, and I will see you at approximately 7:45 p.m.
All right, well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Today we're going to talk about enabling real-time analytics with CDC, which is change data capture and data warehouse automation. We're also going to talk about design patterns for near real-time analytics when you have to move large volumes of data. In the enterprise today, there's quite a few challenges if you work with data. Essentially complex and costly integration. Now we have many types of systems that you have to integrate. You have cloud systems, you have streams and message queues, and still the old applications, maybe mainframes that are there, they have to be modernized as well to integrate with some of the web apps that folks are building. Traditionally in BI, data warehousing, there's been a long time to value when you start building and looking at integrating and taking requirements. Well, this is going to be 2 months, or you have to look at all the changes that you're going to make in the underlying systems that need to be touched, and historically that's been a very time-consuming process. The other challenge that folks have is just better insight. You know, they want to have better insight for operational efficiency and some idea on how much all these things are going to cost that they're integrating. Here is a classic statement. It's from a data warehousing manager at a Fortune 500 insurer. It took 1 year to deliver a change request. When it was finally done, it was no longer required. How many of us have been in that situation? Like, are you so excited you finally got it done? Oh yeah, that's great, we don't need it anymore. It's like, wow, all right. That essentially, a lot of folks don't understand what's involved in that. And the good news is things is getting a lot better so that you can be quicker in delivering value to the customers. Okay, next slide. I think somebody just took control from me. So industry trends. I am fascinated with following the industry every single day. And what's happening right now, and shouldn't be a shock to anyone, is the migration to cloud. It is really happening. I'm surprised 2 years ago companies that I talked to that absolutely would not touch the cloud are adopting the cloud today. So it is happening, and typically the apps will move first and then you'll start to see BI move. And what we're seeing right now in the cloud BI space, the larger vendors that focus only on cloud BI are reporting, you know, over 30%, most of them over 100% year-over-year growth in cloud for BI. So as more apps are moving to the cloud, the front ends are moving to the cloud, it gets really tricky because those data warehouses are still on-prem or those larger data sources are on-prem, and you have to try to mix and match these two and have a performant solution. And if you don't believe me, I would challenge you to take a look at job trends on Indeed. It's free to do that. And I enjoy doing that about once a month to get a feeling for what's going on. But if you look at the clouds, for instance, the AWS and Azure, you can clearly see that's the way things are going. It's massively, like I said, picked up in about 2015 was the turning point. And now we have massive, massive growth. And if you start to look at some of the technologies that you're used to, if you did a search for SQL Server, it might be a little distressing because you're going to see what's happening is there's a shift. So as this is growing, your skills are just shifting into a different direction. But what does this mean for you? This means that you need to start looking at what are the databases that are popular in the cloud. And the good news is SQL Server certainly has Azure SQL database and the data warehouse that's in the cloud, as well as the data lake and other types of capabilities in the cloud. One of the other ones that's really popular in cloud world, and this is from a company called Tableau. They did a data source research back in June that they released of this year, so it's very timely information. The most popular cloud database right now is Redshift. So what if you want to get SQL Server data to Redshift, or you need to spread it out, maybe you're trying Google BigQuery? It's been a little tricky to do that. And I'm going to show you in this session some easier ways to get data from, say, SQL Server to whether it's SQL Server in the cloud, maybe it's the data lake, it could be Google BigQuery or other types of data sources. So here are the challenges, and if you followed me for a while, I've been big on this topic. Gartner has been big on this topic because it's reality. I'm sure if some of you are already dealing with this, if you do have apps in the cloud or if you have experimented with Power BI in the cloud and you've tried the hybrid connectivity on-prem, you really need to have that data close to the app itself for the performance, because there are certain things that still come into play here. In what I would say the cloudy big data world, data movement and integration is still complex. There's improved caching capabilities. But the distance, and especially if you travel, a lot of times you can't control the data center for the app. If you start to travel overseas and you're showing a reporting application, and I ran into this a lot last year, where it wouldn't render because there was a whole concept of I was too far away from the Redmond data centers. And so there was a latency there. I was just way too far away for it to be realistically performant. You're also going to have bandwidth and throughput, and anybody that's worked with databases and you get those calls, the database is slow. Now you're going to take that and it's up a whole nother level because you're dealing with cloud in this as well. So what do you do? There's an inevitable need to move data closer. So my point is, as you have the apps and wherever your big data is where you need to try to have the apps be close to. And as the data starts to move to the cloud, it'll be a little bit easier. But right now, you need to get the data there. And that's not always as easy as it sounds. One thing that Amazon did, when I say it's not as easy as it usually sounds, is they came out last year with Amazon Snowball. It's this massive box that they send, and you lock it up, and you put, okay, we're going to put our data warehouse in a box, and then send it to the data center. So there are creative ways, but that's a one-time answer. What we'll be showing you today is a continual answer to this problem, and I'm a little bit nicer than putting your data in a box. So the theme for today is you need to defy data gravity. You need to have queries that move at the speed of light. Your users are impatient, and they're used to great technologies on premise. We need to have that now happen in the cloud as well. So there's a few things when you start looking at deploying to the cloud you'll want to do. You'll want to look at the data laws, and this gets really important when you're dealing with some of the European data laws that are going to be coming due in the next few years. So security is a really, really important topic as to where you can move your data and have it perform well. You still have, as you talked about, the caching, the distance, those challenges there. And the other thing to be thinking about is, testing and querying and looking to say, hey, does it time out or not? And if it doesn't time out, will it time out once you put a load on it? And so you can have things like content delivery networks, and there's all other types of proxying. However, essentially, at the end of the day, a lot of times what we're going to find, and what I found in Power BI, was we talked about having that hybrid connectivity, but we would always end up recommending you should just move that analysis services to Azure, host it there, it'll be closer and it will work. And the idea is that you really want to move your data essentially closer to the front-end app, and that's what you're going to end up doing. So now that you know as an architect, you still have to move data, even though everyone says, oh, don't move data, don't move data. It's unrealistic that you won't be moving some data. You'll want to have a solution that allows you to work cross-platform. Many businesses have different apps that run in different platforms, and I'm not sure if you're running into this already, but I certainly did in the program management role that I had working with cloud apps. Lots of folks don't even realize what the business has bought and where in the world it is. So when they go to build BI with it, you need to be able to connect to it. Another important requirement when you think about moving data and replication will be, can I move to different data sources? Ideally, you would define it once and potentially have that SQL Server data be able to populate all sorts of different data sources and not necessarily be scripting each one manually or trying to figure out the syntax and, okay, I'm going to go to the Oracle replication and now I'm going to go to the SQL replication and now I'm going to go to Teradata's. Ideally, it would be one single pane of glass that you could see all of the data, and you would be able, the technologies today are smart enough that it's available to you. It's just a matter of having awareness, testing it, and understanding the capabilities that are available to you. So when I look at modern architectures, and I think I have some little arrows here that'll come up. Yay, good. When I'm looking at it, We're seeing APIs and streaming, so things like Azure Streaming Analytics and Kafka Streaming, we'll talk about that. The Internet of Things and event hubs, bringing in data. We have good old ETL that we're all familiar with. One of the things we're seeing more is a little bit of ELT, where you're extracting then loading it, then you'll worry about transforming it later. And the whole design patterns are changing of let's just get the data in there. So we're just ingesting it now. We're not necessarily defining every single field and requirement, because now instead of reading on the load, we're reading on the write. I think I said that right, or I said that backwards. The next thing that I have here in the design patterns that what I'm focusing on a bit is the change data capture and incrementally being able to replicate to all these different data sources. And you may or may not have what's called in the modern design patterns what's called a logical data warehouse. And the logical data warehouse, and you're also seeing design patterns of data virtualization, where it provides, essentially it's like a big distributed query to all these different types of sources that you'll be replicating to. And then you have the front ends, and everyone's familiar with the front ends. Probably the newest area of front ends here is cognitive and the artificial intelligence finally coming mainstream. So as technology evolves and we get to enjoy all these different improvements in connectivity, in rapid builds, in getting features every single week, that's really exciting. It's hard to keep up. And if you're still building data warehouses manually, you may want to take a look at probably one of the most beautiful things that I've seen as a hands-on practitioner is the whole concept of data warehouse automation. I came across it probably about, 2012, and was testing it and really impressed. So essentially what data warehouse automation allows you to do is you can discover and create model-driven ETL automatically for you. And if you've ever estimated data warehouses, use that Kimball toolkit that generates the little spreadsheet that will generate the scripts with your dimensions and facts. That's 80% of the work. With data warehouse automation, that 80% really is reduced. So we're looking at simply pointing it to a data model and that ETL generated for you. Some other cool things with the automation, if you have not looked at automation yet, because this is one of the areas where you're really going to improve not just the time to value for the business that's impatient, but also quality and consistency and how you're defining. So as different developers go through, the tool itself will have the automated definitions in there, and you won't have different naming conventions, etc. One of the things I personally liked about the data warehouse automation was lineage and impact analysis. It's something that is very hard for a lot of different tools to handle in a lot of different scenarios, and even as a program manager for these BI tools, no one seemed to care about lineage and impact analysis except for myself and a few other hands-on practitioners that understood how difficult in the real world when you have maybe 30, 40, 50, 60 systems hitting a data warehouse, or it makes a big difference to have that and understanding the level of work. So lineage and impact analysis is also there for you and will help you in being more agile and understanding what's going to happen. So the benefits of data warehouse automation, if you haven't played around with this already, highly suggest it. In addition to it just being fun for data lovers, it's fairly impressive on what it can do. It will eliminate the manual coding of a lot of tedious ETL that's just not fun work to begin with. There's many other much more fun things, I promise you. Integrated change data capture from source systems. Again, that's really nice for those incremental loads. It's very agile, so it allows you to be much more flexible when someone comes in and says, well, now we have this requirement, because requirements change rapidly. And it's actually fairly simple to install and implement. I know when I was testing this, I probably spent a day or two just load testing and putting a design together, and immediately I had a nice warehouse. Another comment from someone that's actually implemented this. So again, it's one thing to say, yep, that's great. I've tested it. It works wonderful on my tests, but how does it work in the real world? There's nothing more comforting than calling someone up on the phone and saying, hey, did that work for you? And in this case, this is a leading national furniture manufacturer. There's a data architect there. And it says prior to this, it would take a couple weeks to make a change. Now we're looking at a day. So that's a massive improvement over being able to execute and deliver to the business. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass it to Riza and have him show you, because seeing is one of those things, and granted, we're going to show you Atunity's version of this. There's multiple versions of the same types of technology out there. I just want you to see it.
Okay, thank you very much, Jen. Before I actually go into the demo, I just wanted to remind everyone that there's also a handout available that you can download the PDF version of the presentation that's being shared today. So feel free to do so as part of the takeaway materials. All right, let me bring up my demo environment. So what you're looking at right now is Attunity Compose, and Attunity Compose, as Jen has been talking about, is our ETL, our data warehouse automation tool. I'm going to spend a couple minutes here showing you how easy it is to use something like Attunity Compose to basically discover your data warehouse, your model, and use that as a basis for model-driven data warehouse automation. So I'll show you how easy it is to build a data warehouse and how easy it is to also build a data mart and actually see the results of data that's coming in from your data sources. So there's a four-step process here, and we start out by connecting to our data sources. And there are two data sources that I'm actually connecting to. First is the data warehouse, which in this case is a SQL server. The name of that data warehouse is just a database called DWH running on a local SQL server here. And I've defined that my data warehouse schema is DWH and my data mart schema is DM. So if I test the connection, just to make sure everything's working correctly, all looks good. And then my second data source is a direct connection to my landing area, because I'm going to be ingesting data from all of these different data sources into a landing area within the data warehouse. And that is being hosted in another database called Data Warehouse Landing. And there I've got a schema of DBO, and I've got a replicate task associated with this process, which allows me to perform the CDC, or the change data capture. And we'll get into this as we go further into the presentation. But for now, we'll focus on Compose. And then additionally, I'm also connecting directly to the source database where I'm getting my data so that I can discover the schema. So let me go ahead and test that. And the source database that I'm getting all of my data from right now is called Northwind. So it's basically just the demo database that's available and easy to use as part of Microsoft SQL. So with my schema, my source data sources already created, I can then go to the second step where I'll go and discover the model. I have two ways I can manage this. I can either import from an ER-Win model, or I can just go to the source and discover. And in this case, that's what I'm going to use. So I'm going to select discover. I'm going to select SQL Server as the source that I'm going to be discovering my model from. And once I click OK, I'm given a little window that allows me to now browse and select all of the tables that are part of my model. Once I've selected that, I'm just going to go ahead and add them to the selected tables or views and click OK. And what we're doing right now is generating the model based on what we've defined. So it will create all of the things that are required, including all the relationships, etc., as part of this model. So once I click OK, you can see now that I have 15 entities, 13 relationships, and 78 attributes. Now I can go in and take a look at those entities, here I'm actually looking at all of the tables that are part of the logical model. So as I scroll through, I can see all of the different tables. I want to do a quick change in my order details. So I'll go to order details here, and you can see that I've got products, unit price, quantity, and discount. So what I want to do as part of my ETL is to add a new column, and I'll call this one total price. And I'm going to add a new column there of type decimal. And I'm going to add a very small formula that calculates this the value for me. So in this case, it's going to be the quantity times unit price. If I parse that expression, it gives me a quick test to make sure that my my formula is doing exactly what I wanted. In this case, if I had a quantity of 2 and a unit price of 10, then I test that expression, I expect to see 20. So a very easy to use interface that allows you to use all kinds of operators and functions to perform your ETL as part of the model definition. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and click OK and save my changes here. So let's go ahead and save that. And now that I've got that defined, I can validate it, make sure that everything is okay so that there are no issues with my model and everything looks good. Then I can display it, which allows me now to see all the relationships. So for instance, if I go to order details, I can see how it relates to the rest of all the entities in this model. And I have either a diagram view or a tree view that depends on how you want to actually visualize the data. Okay, now that I've got my my entities defined and I've got my model, I want to go ahead and start creating the data warehouse. So if I take a look at my target here, you can see that my tables are empty. So I'll go back to compose, and the first thing I'll do is to create the data warehouse. And basically what we're using is that model to generate automatically all the SQL scripts to create this data warehouse for us. So I'm going to populate the data yet, just creating all the columns, etc., and basically running all of these SQL commands to generate the entire data warehouse for us. And as this is running, if I switch back to my SQL Server here, we can see now that all the tables are created. So here's my data warehouse being actually created, and they're empty right now. So for instance, if I look and I run a query on my orders, we'll see that there is actually no data there in that that table as yet. There's only the timestamp data that's there. Switching back, we can see now that the data warehouse tables were created. So what I want to do is go into manage this data warehouse, and what I'm going to do is generate the ETLs. And that means that we're now going to basically perform the loading of that data from the staging location that was initially loaded, and then basically start generating all the ETL commands that are needed to populate the data. And you can see here very quickly and efficiently we've got thousands of ETL commands that are being generated. It's successfully created, and then I can take a look at my ETL commands by going into the ETL instructions. You can see 1,069 instructions here. You can scroll through and look at each one of them individually. You have an itemized view or individual views that allows you to basically look at each and every single one of these ETL instructions. So with that completed, I'm going to go ahead and run this now. And what this will do is now begin the actual population of the data from the landing area into my data warehouse. And you can see this happening in real time, that we're actually basically generating, based on all those ETLs that we generated, moving the data and loading it over into the data warehouse. So with this completed, if I switch back to my data warehouse and I re-execute this query, now we've got all our data here sitting in that data warehouse. And this is ready to start running your reports. Now the final stage that I wanted to show you here is that now that we've got our data warehouse, we can make things a little bit more streamlined in terms of also creating your data marts for you. And we can actually use this data mart to visualize some of the information that we're getting from the data warehouse, or from the data populated into these tables. So I'm going to create a new data mart. Just call this data mart 1. And I'm going to be creating a transactional star schema. So I'll basically select transactional, hit next, and what I want to select is my order details and orders as part of my facts and products. So these are going to define where I'm getting my information for this specific data mart. Then I need to define my dimensions. In this case, I'm going to select everything here that's suggested for me. I like how they look. And then finally, I'm going to go to my transaction date, and that's going to be my order date. So once I hit that, now I'm basically creating that, that specific data mart. So first thing I'll do is now create the tables. And with that completed, if I switch back to my data warehouse database, you can see now that here my data mart table is being created, and they're ready, ready for me to start generating the data and loading them. And then what I'll do is click generate here now to generate my ETL statements for populating the data mart. Again, a very simple and easy to use interface that allows you to quickly do things that are pretty complex to do as part of manual processes. And once that's done, I'll click the run button, and this will actually allow me to start loading the data into the data mart. And once this is done, we have a little pivot table which allows you to visualize the data mart before you actually start running some data. So this is completed. I can go to my pivot table here, and very quickly I'm going to select a few things. First, I'm going to select from the order details here, I want to select the product name, and I'm going to select the total price, which was generated as part of that ETL that I did. And then I'm going to go into my customers table. I'm going to say, let's get the company name. And finally, I'll go to my categories table, and I'll select the category name. So I'll click OK, and this brings me up to my little pivot table here. What I'm going to do is basically take the product name, the company name actually, and put it over into the left. I'm going to take the product name and the category name and drop that down into my columns, and I'm going to basically say let's do a sum of the total price. And now this gives me a visualization of the data that was populated into that data mart, and I can basically do a couple of checks, and here's a little heat map that shows me data directly from that data mart that was just generated. So very quick and simple and easy to use. And you can see within a matter of minutes, I was able to not only build a data warehouse, but also build a data mart and actually run a sample report. With that, I'm going to pass it back over to Jen to continue.
That is awesome. I really wish I had that eight or 9 years ago, quite honestly. I can think of so many use cases for that, even in iteration and imagination level on a project. All right, so we took a look at what that demo showcased was the automated integration as well as the data warehouse automation. So it's automating the whole concept of the ETL as well. And again, that's 80% of the work, so that is very nice. When you look at automated integration, you're going to want to have, when you're thinking about specifying requirements, centralized control, the ability to reach on-premises and in the cloud. And if you are on-premises today, you'll want to be cloud ready in your decision making, just making sure that you are ready for those data sources, looking at the trends, it is happening, and you need to be ready for that. Some other things to be looking at are the wide ranges of data sources. So when you're looking at different solutions that are available, you'll want to make sure that it can handle things like NoSQL and MongoDB and these streaming data sources like Kafka that are out there, not just relational databases. For handling my data gravity dilemma, you're going to want to look for things like caching and data compression, and is it parallelizing, that's a tongue twister there, how it's moving data through the networks. You'll want to be able to optimize and configurize batch sizes. So even though we live in a real-time world, there are still needs for batch. Looking at this just a little differently, what you saw, target schema creation, we could have shown heterogeneous data types. We didn't in that particular demo, but we certainly could have. You have the option there to, the one-time load is a batch per se, and then incrementally trickling through. So imagine maybe you are developing that to a cloud data warehouse or a set of cloud data warehouses by region. You'll want to be able to trickle to the region and keep it going. So ideally it would be automated to end. It would still allow you to customize. So a lot of times when I look at tools and there's wizards, if I can't access the script, I get a little anxious about that. That's something you'll want to look at, and you'll want to make sure that you can optimize and configure it. That's where you're bringing the value, is really making sure that these solutions work very, very well for your scenario, your environment, making sure that it applies with security. Moving on to another design pattern is replication. And I used to be a replication expert in SQL Server back in, oh my goodness, it's about 2009. I managed replication for one of the, I guess, Fortune 500s, and it was SQL to SQL. We had some Oracle, but it was quite tricky. Replication architecture, you still will have your batches and your change data captures. What is different than when I was managing it are the concepts that I can connect to different types of data sources and just have it work. The other thing that's really different, and again this is the whole industry, when you think about things like Spark that's in memory, it's really, really fast, is the whole concept of now we have replication networks in memory so it can handle very fast data sources. Being able to filter and to transform and look at those row-level transactions if you need to, and then being able to send it to different places. So in this case, we've got to files. Maybe you're sending it to Kafka, and we're going to talk about that in a bit for those intense situations, or you're populating that data lake. And for the most part, that is what a lot of SQL DBAs are doing now. They're starting to populate data lakes and data warehouses, and that is where the skill sets should be growing. So we look at, there is replication that comes in SQL Server, but this is a whole other level higher, and it also works across many different technologies. So one of the questions that I had when I first talked to Attunity was, well, tell me what makes you different. What is different about this, and why is that interesting? And when they showcased the scenarios, I said, yep, this makes sense to me, because you wouldn't want to have individual change data captures and replication jobs all over the place. So it's one unified system that can handle all these different scenarios, whether you're ingesting and merging into a data warehouse or data lake, maybe you're just streaming in data from these different types of stream data sources, etc. So it can handle all those different scenarios. The other thing that's different, and different from when I was handling replication with SQL Server, is this whole concept of optimized for cloud data transfer. So this concept of being able to apply different types of compressions that are made ideal for those specific cloud environments. We didn't have Google Cloud environment, and now we have AWS and Azure, and just optimizing compression and security and making that an easy button type routine is something that makes these types of technologies that are available today so much better, and also able to handle what I call the data gravity pains of, I have to move this data, and oh my goodness, I do not want it to time out. And if you're managing replication, I remember getting those calls. It's like, oh no, it timed out again. Somebody's down, Denver's down. So it's being able to handle, hey, a system went out, and being able to pick up and leave and apply those transactions in order. So having said that, I'm going to pass back. Again, seeing is believing, seeing is understanding and learning. Let's see an example of this.
Thank you, Jen. So what I'm going to do is switch gears to our replication platform. And what you're looking at is the the actual platform that I use to load the data from my source Northwind database into the landings area, but I wanted to highlight for you some capabilities of how we would do heterogeneous data loading. Let's say, for instance, you had a task that was loading from SQL Server. It's pretty straightforward going from SQL to SQL, but what if you had a data source that was Oracle, and you needed to get some of that data and ingest it and make it available in your data warehouse? So Trinity Replicate, which is our data replication platform, makes that very easy to use. You can see the interface in terms of how you use it is very simple to use, just like the Trinity Compose interface. It's an HTML5 drag and drop interface. So what I'll do is begin here by creating a new endpoint connection. I'll call this one Oracle, and that's my source. You can see a vast array of sources and targets that the Trinity Replicate supports. In this case, I'm going to be selecting Oracle. Then I'll define my connection string. And my username and password. And then test that. And this will verify my connection to the Oracle source. So that looks good. I'll save that. I want to also create a new SQL target. So I'll call this one SQL target. And from my target definitions, you can see a lot of different targets that we can support, including those cloud platforms like Amazon Redshift as a target, Google Cloud SQL, or if you're going to Microsoft Azure SQL Data Warehouse. In this case, though, I'm going to be going to a local SQL server, and this is running again on my local machine. And I'm just going to define my access credentials, and now I'm going to be loading my data. I can browse the target, and I'll load it into a database called demo target. I'll test that and make sure that's all working well. Looks good. So I'll save it, and now I need to define my replication task. So it's very easy to do. What I'll do is go to task and select new task. I'll call this one Oracle to SQL. And I'm going to do a full load and apply changes, which is a bulk load and change data capture. So the first thing I'll do is drag my Oracle source and then drag my SQL target into the definition. I go to table selection and then say, what's my source schema? In this case, I've got a bunch of data sitting in the HR schema. I can select all of them if I wanted, and I can use include or exclude statements, or just select a few explicitly selected tables. Just going to select those few, and one thing I'm going to do is go into the employees table and add another little transformation. In this case, if I go to the transform tab, it shows me that I've got first and last name, but I don't have a full name. So I'll add a new column. I'll call this one full name. And then I'll do a small concatenation, which is first name with a space, and then last name. And I can parse that to make sure it all works well. Test that. Looks good. I'm happy with that. I'll click OK. And at this point, I have everything I need to start my replication task. I'll just save that and click Run. And you'll see that the Replicate will switch from design mode into monitor mode and give you real-time feedback as to how the data loading process is actually progressing. You can see very quickly and easily that we've gone ahead and loaded just over 10,000 records here. So it's a very simple and easy to use interface. If I go now to my target and open up my target table, you can see that it was empty. I refresh that. Now I've got those 4 tables created. So very simple and easy. Now what happens if there are new changes coming in? So I've got a little application here that allows me to perform some changes. I'm going to insert 10 new records. So you can see here 10 new rows inserted. And if we switch back to Replicate, we have the change processing tab, and you'll see that we'll automatically detect that based on the committed inserts, excuse me, and apply them to the target. Similarly, if I also did some some updates, you can see now that I've basically updated just over 10,000 rows. And I go back, that's all detected as a single transaction, and very quickly we'll go ahead and apply those to the target as well. And you can see that the UI has quickly updated to show me that those updates were now applied to my target. And if I were to go and query my target table, which is employees, and I select all of my data and execute that, now we can see we have the full 10,117 rows there. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Jen.
Thanks. That's nice. I was using BCP to populate Azure Data Warehouse and getting stuck on a few of the little scripts for that, as is tested Redshift moving data, and it was much more painful. I have a blog on that. So that's pretty nice. All right, so let's take a look at, hopefully I've got control of this to move this line. We'll go through these slides pretty quickly. Any chance I can get control?
Yeah, Jen, you have control at this point, so just move the mouse a little bit and then you should be able to continue.
Okay, well I didn't mean to move that fast, so let's go through these. All right, so the first one, and I've talked about this before with a lot of folks, is this whole concept of querying across realms. This was what I talked about. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't when you're dealing with data gravity. Depends on where these things are located and the bandwidth and whatnot. But it does exist. There's ability if you have small data sets. So when you're thinking about scenarios where this may work and you may not need to necessarily move data, you have SQL Polybase. There's also in SQL Server 2016 the ability to query across realms with StretchDB. Another capability that exists, this is a concept called elastic queries, and this is more from a cloud perspective of just being able to, again, in this particular perspective, you're all in the cloud. You're not necessarily hybrid in this scenario. That was interesting. Who's moving the mouse? Thank you. All right, so Kafka. Kafka's awesome. If you haven't been playing around with this, I certainly suggest, and you work with larger data warehouses and data movement today, this is a technology you will want to be aware of in the Internet of Things big data world. It moves high volumes of data, talking about 100,000 K transactions or more. This is the technology that was used by LinkedIn, Netflix, and Twitter to be able to move different volumes. And Microsoft works really well with Kafka, as you'll see most of the providers out there. What is really cool, and I haven't seen before, is that Attunity, also the replication works with Kafka. My point being that when you're looking at designing and you're making sure that what you pick an architect is future friendly and future ready, you may not need Kafka today, but you know that CIO or that CFO is going to come in and say, or CEO, come running in, well, we just got this deal and can we make this happen, and we're now going to have all these sensors on cars or refrigerators or whatever it is, washing machines. Send information. And thus, as the data person, you'll have to make sure that your data replication and your data movement architecture can support that. So what does it look like? Same design pattern again. What's a little bit different here is this is where in-memory is really key. So being able to have in-memory optimized metadata in the transport of the different data streams. And at the end of the day, you're still going to be transferring, instead of rows and columns, we're looking at JSON data formats that message broker will consume and then feed into other different systems. So a few tips and best practices. Build it right, and we've heard this. There's this really cute one. If you pay for I can't remember if you pay for a professional or you don't pay for a professional, you're going to pay 10 times more. There's a cute little article somewhere, or a little cartoon on that. Build it right. Leverage proven methodologies. A lot of us in the SQL world are Kimball framework, and there's the Kimball toolkits that I talked about earlier with, you have the little scripted spreadsheets and whatnot that would help you design. There's certainly, that's not the only design out there. So if you don't want to reinvent the wheel, maybe you want to look at Inman, or you want to look at Vault, or you want to look at different types of model types that are available. Really the key is making sure that you're not reinventing the wheel here. The other thing you want to do is be agile. So being able to rapidly iterate. And this is, for data warehousing folks, this is tough. It's tough for me to understand, but hopefully when you saw the types of automation that's available today, the ability to point to a source, point to a destination, have the ETL created for you, honestly, I wish I had that 10 years ago. I really, really needed it. But being agile and flexible and being able to rapidly iterate, making sure that the solutions that you're designing are able to handle that. Automating workflow. Not every single thing can get automated, but if it can, awesome. And just look at the different pieces that are getting automated and where you're wrapping. And this is when you talk about going into your annual review and saying, this is how much time we saved. Automating workflows end-to-end of a data warehouse build, if you're not already automating it, that is low-hanging fruit for you to really make a big impact in your organization. And then come review time, show how much time you've saved, put some money and man hours to it, just like a consultant would, on what a massive value you bring to that organization. Ensuring data integrity. So this is probably, we're probably all guilty of this. Profiling data and looking at issues before you load it. A lot of folks don't do that. So ideally, when you're thinking about tips and best practices, even if you have to have a little sticky on the wall, just run some profiling, take a look at what's there, and fix the data, ideally at the source. So the best practices have always been try to fix it at the app. Sometimes you can't change the app, and you have to just deal with it, downstream. But ideally, it's fixing it as soon as you can in the process is the best practice there. Improving data quality. So you have the concept of the chief data officer, the digital economy. Data folks are getting a lot of C-level attention. Nobody cared about us before. Honestly, when I said, well, when we're going to do replication to all of our data centers or distribution warehouses, just as long as people could sell, they cared if replication was working. Otherwise, they didn't know Gen Underwood existed. But the C-level organizations now, they want to know about data. In fact, I went to a thought leadership conference in end of July, and the legal officers for companies in Europe are now getting involved in data projects, not just the contract, the actual project themselves. That's how important this particular point is. And then I mentioned it earlier, the whole ability to be able to trace lineage and analyze change impact. Hopefully we're all really great at that, but quite frankly, I've seen very few organizations that are. When you do start to apply some of these technologies, they will help you, the automation will provide this lineage for you. It doesn't have to be, well, now we have to find this separate utility that maybe can do it, or we know a consulting firm that has this, or it actually is, it's ingrained in the process. So wrapping up, and then I'm going to give it to, I believe Kevin may be on the call to talk about some real-world case studies. So again, how is this really happening? It sounds awesome, but what do customers have to say? And the bottom line, a lot of the different customers that were showcased and discussed as the cost itself. So clearly, if you've ever built a data warehouse, I've never built a data warehouse in, 3 minutes, 5 minutes? It was amazing what I just saw. And the value itself. So if you're able to move faster, you're able to get through those requirements and automate it, that you can do so much more and bring so much more value to the organization and be future ready. So at the end of the day, your job as a data professional is getting better. And you are bringing the value of data in real time or near real time to an organization. And it is possible. These are scenarios that were not really possible in the past. But when you start combining true enterprise scale replication that can feed multiple cloud data centers where the apps are, you can get really sophisticated. So just want to pass Kevin, hopefully he is here for the last few minutes.
Hi Jen, I'm here, thank you. Okay, very good. So folks, we have a few minutes here, and what I want to do is just give a taste of what we see customers doing in the wild and what we can learn from that. I'm going to focus mostly on successes in the interest of showing the benefits of adopting best practices that Jen's walked through and that Riza has shown you live in terms of software automation and the powers of that. Just quickly, this is a summary of the key use cases, what we call solutions, capabilities of our software that we help them address across 4 big market segments: Hadoop and big data, data warehousing, database, and cloud. We help address critical use cases when it comes to moving data, understanding how data is being used, transforming it in the data warehouse, and using that intelligence about how it's being used to optimize performance and cost. I've bolded here, I think, the most relevant use cases for SQL environments: real-time data warehousing with change data capture, data warehouse automation, we got a glimpse of that, enterprise data replication, the notion of query offload to reporting databases for live reporting. Cloud analytics is a key piece of what organizations are really interested in, and then overall cloud migrations. These are all things that we're working with a lot of customers on now, solving these problems. I'm going to give you a couple of case studies. Tangerine Bank is a very interesting bank. They're a direct bank in Canada. They have nearly 2 million clients and close to about $38 billion in assets. What they want to do is become more of a full-service digital bank, and they need to understand their customers better. So they consolidated legacy Oracle, BI, DW, CRM, and WMS onto SQL Server, onto APS in particular. And they're combining a whole set of customer interactions. Every face-to-face and phone interaction with a customer, in addition to social media sentiment from the customer service group, as well as the more conventional financial transactions. By putting this information together, by leveraging real-time feeds, they were able to gain faster insights at a deeper level, reduce the data that was required to drive these insights because they could identify what was being used. They lowered their latency and they cut their cost. They really were able to look more strategically at sales and marketing programs with deeper customer insights based on multi-channel monitoring of what these customers are saying. Another real-world example, global insurance company used Opportunity Compose, and I won't give you all the stats here. The upshot is that they had a massive complex transformation, a consolidation onto a new data warehouse, a new SQL data warehouse that would have required thousands of lines of handwritten ETL commands. They were able to automate the vast majority of it. They reduced the FTEs required for this effort 40%. 45 budgeted days of ETL coding became 2, and they're now able to make updates on a monthly basis rather than twice a year. So that's real agility, and it's very promising in terms of what you can achieve. I want to skip ahead a little bit here in the interest of time and just show you one more. We work with Swiss Life France. They've used Opportunity Replicate. And what they were doing was creating a Vision 360 project which brings together all kinds of customer data, all the customer data they have into one repository. And that repository is a way to empower all kinds of groups throughout the business. They wanted to have an elastic search engine that can serve requests from portals for multi-device applications for customer service, salespeople, and employees, other types of employees. Without Opportunity, they simply could not have done this because of the costly development work. They had to automate in order to make this feasible from a financial perspective. So he says we would have been forced to give up on our real-time data propagation requirement. So I think that's a pretty powerful testament to the power of automation, the power of automated setup of CDC in particular to enable those real-time insights. So at this point, I think we're at time. I really enjoyed the insights from Riza and from Jen, and I can hand back over to you, Jen, to wrap up.
Great, thanks for coming. I think the deck itself will be available for download if it wasn't already. If not, please reach out to us and we will certainly get you what you need. Also, if you do have questions, we are sorry that we ran a little late. We will certainly answer questions. You can reach us on Twitter or you can reach us on email that was available at the beginning of the deck. Thanks so much for coming today and enjoy the next session.
Okay, thank you, Jen, Kevin, and Reza. This is Paresh, guys, back with me. And thank you for attending the session, and do follow the PASS24HOP at PASS24HOP on Twitter, and please share your thoughts on Twitter as well. So thank you. I'm going to sign out from here.